Welcome to Themis Podcasts. Themis is a leading technology platform that helps clients manage their financial crime risk exposure through a combination of innovation, insight, and intelligence. Our podcasts aim to bring you insight, views, emerging trends, and thought leadership from industry leaders and our own financial crime experts. Find out more about Themis at crime.financial. In this episode, Themis think tank manager Olivia Day-Keane speaks to wildlife investigations specialist Mickey Wu and Themis head of investigations Henry Williams about the latest threats and trends in the illegal wildlife trade. Mickey Jun Wu is the investigations specialist at the Wildlife Justice Commission with extensive experience in the investigation and intelligence collection of transnational organised wildlife crimes. Henry Williams is the head of investigations at Themis and played a leading role in developing our illegal wildlife trade toolkit. In addition, he has 14 years' experience as an investigator and journalist, during which time he led teams working on several of the largest corporate investigations to be prosecuted over the last decade. He has also acted as a consultant to the financial investigations industry, which included work identifying leading investment banks' exposure to the illegal wildlife trade in China. Listen to this podcast to hear about the very latest developments in the field of the illegal wildlife trade, both on the side of the perpetrators and law enforcement, and some fascinating case studies from those working on the front line.
My pleasure to be here today talking to Mickey Wu and Henry Williams, two real experts in the area, about some of the latest trends and emerging techniques used in the illegal wildlife trade. It's a really fascinating but also a devastating topic. We know that the illegal wildlife trade is the fourth most lucrative financial crime globally, after drugs, arms, and human trafficking, and it's worth about £18 billion a year. We also know that it's inherently linked to other forms of financial crime, including money laundering, trade-based money laundering, drugs and arms trafficking, terrorist financing, bribery and corruption, fraud, and other environmental crimes like illegal logging and deforestation. So it's a really important topic as a crime that has extremely far-reaching consequences. Here at Themis, and Henry Williams, our guest in particular, we've done a lot of research on the illegal wildlife trade, including as part of our illegal wildlife trade toolkit, which we developed with the UK government, World Wildlife Fund and Traffic, which is available to institutions free of charge. And any listeners, you can get in touch with us if you'd like to book a demo in. But we'd like to talk today about some of the very latest developments in this field of research and any emerging trends we're starting to see in the trade of illegal wildlife. And this is so important because traffickers continuously change their techniques and trade routes and financial mechanisms of choice. So we really do need to keep educating ourselves on the latest developments if we want to be one step ahead of the traffickers in order to stop this illegal and destructive trade. So to start off, Mickey, can you tell us about any particular trends that we are seeing in relation to the illegal wildlife trade at the moment?
So I think it's very important to understand the illegal wildlife trade from two different perspectives. I think first of all, to understand the species and also sometimes they call it transportation is just as important as the commodities of the illegal wildlife trade. So when we're looking at the species of the illegal wildlife trade, some of those most iconic species, say elephant ivory and rhino horns, are still very much sought after in the Asian market. What we are seeing is that the ivory is going a little bit down because of many different reasons. One of the most important reasons is the ivory ban in China in 2017, 2018. The ivory traders, we've noticed in our investigations that the ivory traders expressed less interest in trading ivory due to increased law enforcement activities and also strengthened legislations. And also the buyers expressed their less demand for ivory, elephant ivory in this front. Around the rhino horns are a little bit quite stable, so to say, being traded from Africa to Asia. You might know already, Olivia, that pangolin scales are extremely popular in the illegal wildlife trade market, sadly, being traded from Africa to Asia, particularly for its medicinal purposes. What people normally do as customers is that they will grind the pangolin scales into powder and mix it with different kinds of liquors, teas, or alcohol for consumption. The other species that we're seeing really on the uphill is the reptiles, particularly the turtles and tortoises, and also other sort of live pets being traded. So that is a very interesting sort of species and perspective, is because many of the products that we see, commodities we see, are from dead animals, where the animals have already been killed, whether it's elephant or rhino or pangolins, to obtain their teeth, to obtain their horns, or to obtain their scales. While the reptiles, the key factor is that you must keep it alive, and you must keep it as lively as possible. There are a lot of different techniques. Even there are the pet feeders and the caretakers to look after the reptiles, the turtles and tortoises, how much sun they can see during the transit, how much food and water they can consume during the transit, so they don't get into hibernation too early, and they can be waken up once they arrive at the end market for showing to the buyers for a better price. So that's a little bit in that species front. The transportation method, traditionally, by air and by sea are the most usual way of transporting, say, ivory or rhino horn pangolin scales from Africa, Asia, or from other places to the end market in the world. And the traders would normally use air to transport, say, commodities such as rhino horn, which is with higher monetary value, and it seeks a lot bigger investment initially. So the traders and the investors would expect a faster turnaround. They want the products to arrive at the end market to be sold faster, compared to commodities such as elephant ivory with lower commodity monetary value. But what we are seeing, what's slightly changing, is that we're also seeing rhino horns, such an expensive commodity to be traded on the market, to also be shipped by sea. But the proportion, the size, and the volume of the commodity have increased drastically. We see more than 100 kilos of rhino horns being shipped in just one container, compared to, say, average 20-30 kilos a few years ago. So that's very important to notice, because the traders are being more limited to transport these products. So they have to trade more commodities each time to make up the loss of the money that they can make from this trade.
That's really fascinating. Thank you, Mickey. And the scale that you're talking about there is staggering. Henry, is there anything else, any other trends that you've seen that Mickey hasn't already covered?
Yeah, I think Mickey's got a real first-hand view of what's going on in terms of illegal wildlife trading. So it's really fascinating to hear his insights there. What I would say is that, following this space, particularly from the development of the wildlife toolkit we built, is that the red flags we spotted in the sort of final quarter of 2020 are coming into fruition again in 2021. And I think, a lot of things we get asked about is, by publishing the red flags, are you not just tipping off to criminals to ways to avoid being caught? But actually, I think what you're finding is that actually the red flags we spotted are just very symbolic of the typical behaviours. And as Mickey's talked about, rhino horn being transported by passengers on aircraft. We saw recently, I think it was a month ago, there was a bust in Johannesburg airport, exactly that going on, with a passenger transiting through Dubai on their way to Vietnam. And then again, I think some of the ports we've highlighted in our toolkit. Again, you're seeing places like we saw Tian Sha port in Da Nang in Vietnam. There was a huge delivery of pangolin scales, which was captured at that particular port. So I think it's really interesting. You're having that mix of shipping some of the wildlife products and bringing some on by air freight. And I think the tactics we're seeing by the traffickers from the end of last year is pretty similar to this year. I think it's just the worry is that the scale is increasing again. And I'd say just maybe on the online side as well, there's a couple of sort of notable trends, and it's one of those ones you wonder if it's been going on for a while. It's just that enforcement's catching up with it. I think certainly the thing we keep on seeing is tiger cubs being put up for sale in Thailand, um, just on Facebook. And again, I think that's really indicative of a lot of the wildlife crime people are dealing with there. Is the penalties are so low that often the criminals involved don't take huge amounts of steps to hide what they're doing because they're just not used to being caught that often. And so obviously that's a great opportunity for enforcement to really, achieve something there.
Yeah, I hope so. Just to stick with you, Henry, for a second, we're starting to see some increases in prosecutions actually relating to the illegal wildlife trade in particular regions. So we saw in the first 3 weeks of February this year, 79 Namibians appeared in court on wildlife crime related charges. Do you think this increase in prosecutions, do you see it as encouraging or discouraging?
No, I think it's definitely encouraging, and I think you're seeing that in a lot of regions affected by it. I think in Nigeria, I think their environment ministries made looking at wildlife trafficking a priority, and also looking at issues such as bushmeat. Again, I think in places like Singapore, they're reviewing their wildlife protection laws there to make the terms much stronger. But I think you're still going to have the situation where there's a lot of repeat offenders in wildlife crime because they don't get put in prison for very long, or the fines aren't particularly big, and they can just keep on coming back. So no, it's great that jurisdictions, I think particularly in the jurisdictions most affected by it, are beginning to wake up to it. But I think there's still very much a long way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, Mickey, I know you've recently worked on some fascinating things at the Wildlife Justice Commission. I know you probably can't get into too much of the detail, but would you be able to share some good news or any personal insights with us from that work?
For sure, as much as I would love to share the interesting and exciting operational side, there is quite a bit of confidentiality and limited information I can share. But it's very funny that, Henry, you mentioned earlier about the advertising Live Cup on social media. One of the sort of the outcomes that I would like to share with you guys is in May 2022. Actually, there is a live tiger cub that were rescued in Thailand, and I believe it was named New Year for in Thai language, symbolizing a new beginning of the life of the tiger cub. So it was really heartwarming to see such a cute life to be rescued from the illegal wildlife trade and being taken care by so many lovely people around them. But in addition to that, one of the most significant sort of achievements that we have accomplished in the recent years was in July 2021, where 7.1 tons of pangolins scales were seized in Nigeria, together with 850 kilo ivory. It was a very significant case because in early 2020, our undercover investigators initially achieved the entry point through Asia, actually, and then it was followed by introductions to the traders in Nigeria. Of course, the Nigerian Customs Service played a significant role in the joint operation to the arrest of 3 people on the 1st of July 2021. What's worth mentioning is that 7.1 tons of pangolin scales is the 9th largest pangolin scales seizure ever in history. So it really presents a very significant sort of achievement in Nigeria as well, which is very increasingly being used as the hotspot of the trading of the illegal wildlife. So after the seizure in July 2021, with the phone analysis and all the other intelligence that we have received, it's determined that these arrested 3 people were not of the highest level in the criminal organization. So our investigators continued with a non-evidentiary test to purchase of a few ivory tusks under the authority of Nigerian Customs Service. And 1 more ton of pangolin scales were subsequently ceased in September 2021, and 4 more people were arrested. So that was very encouraging news in countries such as Nigeria, which are taking actions and taking effective actions in arresting these illegal wildlife traders, and really setting up an example to these illegal wildlife traders that Nigeria is no longer as a safe haven for them to trade and for them to transport the wildlife products out of Africa to Asia.
That's really great to hear. And I'm very much looking forward to reading more about that research and operations as and when you can publicise more of it.
I'm just going to pause the podcast here to let you know about Themis Search, an end-to-end SaaS screening and investigations platform that will help you to easily search, screen, and monitor your clients, suppliers, and third parties to check if they have any links to financial crime. It also allows you to perform a deep dive investigation and produce an editable enhanced due diligence report. It's updated every 6 hours with the latest data, including sanctions, adverse media, law enforcement, and PEP status. We draw data from a wealth of sources, but also have our own proprietary Themis conviction data around different financial crime typologies, making Themis Search highly unique. Book a demo at crime.financial.
Henry, we often think about and talk about the illegal wildlife trade as something quite exotic that happens on the other side of the globe. We're often mentioning Africa and Asia, but it's also closer to home than a lot of people might think, isn't it? And a bit of a growing problem in the West too, not just in diaspora communities either. Can you tell us a bit about some of the things that you've seen or that you're aware of a bit closer to home?
Yeah, well, certainly. I mean, I think, if you're talking about the West, I think one of the really interesting things is, there's a Ugandan wildlife trafficking network, for instance, which have also been involved in smuggling heroin into the United States. And I think that's one of the things we always want to highlight, is that illegal wildlife trading isn't just about animals. There's organized criminal gangs involved, and for them, wildlife is just one of the many commodities they'll deal with. And they've been attracted to it by the sort of lack of enforcement on it and the huge profits to be made. But they are criminal networks, and they will move around whatever commodity is going to give the most value to them. And I think certainly I think in the UK there's particular issues which the government's looking into. I think one of the things they are looking to ban at the moment is trophy hunting and the import of trophies from the African continent. And I think that's one of the issues actually at the moment, is that trophy hunting is often used as a cover for illegal hunting. And I think this is something we actually see quite often in illegal wildlife trading, which I'm sure Mickey sees in his day-to-day work, is that you have a lot of the criminals involved will set up slightly similar businesses, which give them that sort of perfect cover to be involved in dealing with animals, and then obviously dealing with the illegal wildlife trade. And I think it is something, in the UK, the National Crime Agency is worried about. It's not just African animals, because obviously we're talking about ecosystems as well. And European glass eels are a particular issue around illegal wildlife trading here. So we certainly have, I think there's one individual was caught with about $20 million worth of glass eels at Heathrow Airport. And they might not be the most attractive creatures, but they are part of an ecosystem. They are endangered. But I think also just shows the huge profitability of this particular trade.
Something I know that we've spoken about, which I find really interesting, it might be worth you just telling our listeners about the Mexican cartel's involvement with Mexican fish and drugs trafficking. If you can just elaborate a little bit on that as a nice little case study as well.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I mean that's very interesting as well. Is that talking about this sort of convergence with serious organized crime, and you see Mexican drugs cartels. I think they've lent on the Mexican fishing industry for quite a while anyway, and I think certainly illegal fishing is a form of illegal wildlife trading, which is hugely profitable to the traffickers. And if you think of the amount of money Mexican drugs cartels are making, if they're branching into legal wildlife trading as well, I think it gives you an indication of the profitability there. But in this instance, the tortoba fish is a swim bladder, which is a delicacy. I think certainly in China it's considered such. And what they've been doing is they've been sourcing fentanyl from Chinese crime gangs to obviously make various drugs which they can ship across to the US. And they're taking payment for it in tortoba swim bladders. So you have this very sort of primitive barter system. But again, I think it's symbiotic of the fact that illegal wildlife trading goes hand in hand with organized crime, and obviously it's a global issue, as you're seeing from that trade between Mexico to China.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Thanks, Henry. So it would be nice to end on a positive note and hear about some more good news stories and developments on the other side. I know, Mickey, earlier you mentioned the tiger cub being rescued in Thailand, which is lovely to hear. But are there any particularly encouraging efforts you've seen on the detection and prevention side as well that give you cause for hope on a slightly larger scale?
Sure, Olivia. What we are seeing recently that is really positive is that we're seeing a collective sort of increased law enforcement activities and actions being taken across the board, across the world. Now, I mentioned Nigeria earlier. We're also seeing really strengthened law enforcement activities in China, particularly one of the largest, if not the largest, illegal wildlife trade destination market in the world. So there is I'd like to share a sort of like a case study of the largest rhino horn seizure in China of 250 kilos of rhino horns containing 145 pieces that were seized in China in 2019. But the news wasn't actually made public until much later in 2021 on the World Biodiversity Day, after the Chinese customs have arrested everyone from the criminal network. It's a fascinating case, and I really encourage everyone to look into that if you haven't, because the significance of the case is not only just at the quantity of the rhino horns, but also the sophisticated modus operandi and the sophisticated sort of enhanced law enforcement detection techniques that we've seen in handling such complicated illegal wildlife trade. I've personally never seen that a small ship, which is only 70 meters long, that were deployed directly to ship the rhino horns from Africa to Asia. Usually we're seeing the horns will be transported via air or via big container ship hidden in the or disguised in timber container, but the criminal network of this case actually deployed a small ship, fishing ship almost, to leave Mozambique to China. And once they left the shore, Mozambican Sea, they turned off the AIS navigation system and became sort of, to call it, the ghost ship. There was no radar or anything that can be that can detect its movements. So it's really, and what we're also seeing is that there are 70 horns that were actually still containing the chips of the biodata information of the rhino horns of the rhino from South Africa. So these are all very unique sort of features that we see in the modus operandi of the criminals in this case. What's also interesting to introduce is that the Chinese law enforcement used the big data analysis and satellite images to figure out the shipping route, basically, of the small fishing ship on the way from Mozambique to China, and managed to locate the exact time and the location of the ship, and managed to arrest all the people, both on the ship and from the land. So it's all very encouraging and positive, and it really is a fascinating case. Sort of even also sets an example of how other law enforcement really should do to tackle such a transnational criminal networks, particularly in the illegal wildlife trade.
That's a really encouraging case study to end on. Thanks, Mickey. How about you, Henry? Any positive detection and prevention efforts that you're aware of?
I think it's just great that when we built the toolkit, we spoke to and interviewed. It came up to 700 financial services professionals in the affected region, so in sub-Saharan Africa and in Southeast Asia, and in China itself. And I think uniformly what we're hearing from people was that it was an issue they were concerned by and they wanted to do more to help. And I think that's certainly something we're seeing, certainly with the outreach now with the toolkit, and when we're continually liaising with financial institutions as well as the sort of wider public. There's a lot of appetite to help tackle this trade, and I think that can only be a good thing, because I think we are starting from quite a small base. And if that goes hand in hand with a sort of more committed law enforcement effort, which Mickey was just discussing there, I think there are really real grounds for optimism. And certainly, I think China does remain a primary market for a lot of these wildlife products, and there are various attempts by Chinese law to curb some of the worst practices of trade. I think there's still certainly a number of issues, such as the continued acceptance of so-called farmed wildlife, so a farmed tiger, for instance, which, as I was explaining earlier, is just the perfect cover for the illegal trade. So I think there are still issues there, but certainly things are moving in the right direction, and it's just a case now of just identifying where the good practice is and trying to get that happening more widely around the world, because it is obviously a global crime.
Thank you. And possibly I'm going to be asking you to repeat yourself here, but just to wrap up, what do you think is the single most important thing that's needed to help global efforts to tackle the trade? I know it's a multi-pronged answer, but if you could just get it down to one briefly. Henry, let's start with you, actually, just so you can tell me if you're just going to repeat yourself, you can give me a short, snappy answer.
No, don't worry. I think it's awareness. I think awareness is the absolute number one thing that people can do. I think is to understand, what do illegal wildlife traders doing, and certainly I think from the financial institution point of view is how to spot it, because as I've sort of shown some examples, sometimes this isn't particularly well hidden, and almost so unhidden that you sort of think, well, it must be legitimate what they're doing, like they're sort of selling the tiger cubs on Facebook, when actually it's illegal. And I think the more awareness is around that, then the more you can sort of put the pressure on the traffickers.
Thank you. And how about you, Mickey?
I actually had two, and Henry managed to say public awareness, which I think is absolutely essential in tackling the illegal wildlife trade. It really is so very important in demand reduction in all different aspects of counter wildlife trade. The other thing that I want to mention is potentially to tackle the issue the same as other transnational organized crimes. What we're seeing is really that, as Henry mentioned previously, that the criminals who have been caught committing the crimes were sentenced to relatively light penalty, and they will come out and commit the crime again, because for them it's just a way of making a living, for making money. And there really is so much more to be done in the investigations into the transnational criminal organized crimes, such as illegal wildlife crime itself, such as financial investigations, such as undercover investigations, sophisticated surveillances, as well as big data analysis. There are so much to be done. But we're not seeing that as much in the illegal wildlife trade, which is also why that the toolkit Themis has produced recently just comes right on time. It really provides such a great sort of insight, not only on the latest trends of the illegal wildlife trade, but also the red flags. It really provides such a essential and great and important sort of shout outs to different sectors, particularly the financial sectors around the world, to look out for these most typical typologies in the illegal wildlife trade.
Great. Thank you both so much, Mickey Wu and Henry Williams, for talking to me today about the illegal wildlife trade and latest trends. It's been a really fascinating discussion. It's been really lovely to hear about some of the good news stories as well. So thank you both very much.
Thank you for having me here today, Olivia. It was lovely to speak with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Olivia. That was great, and really appreciate you sort of shining light on this subject.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the latest Themis podcast. If you would like to find out more about Themis, please visit our website at www.crime.financial.